and the number of investment opportunities has increased correspondingly. I'm going to give you my take on the subject, which, as Carrie has said already, I am not an investment professional and I do not give investment advice, and nothing that is said today or happens afterwards should be taken as being investment advice. Okay. Right. I'm going to start off by talking about investment principles before I start talking about anything to do with responsible investing, because responsible investing is simply a subset of investment generally. And it's very important, in my opinion, that people who are thinking of or think of either expanding their investments or getting into ethical investments for the first time should follow basic principles. I think it's extremely important to do so. And the first one of those principles is attitude to risk. You must be prepared. Anybody who invests in anything has got to understand the risks that they're taking with investing. Because if you're investing in equities or company shares or whatever you want to call them, they go up and they go down. And if you're not prepared to take the fact that they go down, then you shouldn't invest in them in the first place. The second most important factor, in my opinion, is what I call time horizon, which is over what period do you envisage investing? Because if you're going to invest in stocks and shares, you should be prepared to hold them for 5 years or longer. Anything that's shorter than that, it probably isn't an appropriate place to be putting your money. You should be always aware of your cash and income needs. It's no good tying up money in long-term investments if you haven't got enough money to live on or to meet known payments out of cash. If you're going to do something to your house or going to buy new things, you need to have the cash to be able to do it. Diversification, I think, is exceedingly important. And what that means is that you don't just put everything in the same type of investment. So you may want to invest ethically, but you need to think that putting everything into things to do with global warming may be wonderful, but sometimes these things can all collapse together. Not all of them work well. It's as well to spread as much as possible over bonds and shares and property, not have everything in a single basket. You may feel that you know what you're doing with investment, but you need to consider, should you take independent advice? And the next thing to consider is, what are your costs? Because investing costs money, not just the cost of buying the investments, but the fact that there are costs attached to buying the investments. People who provide investments don't do it for nothing. People advising investments don't do it for nothing. You've got to pay out costs. So you've got to be aware at all times of what it's going to cost you. And the last thing I'll just mention is day trading. As far as I'm concerned, day trading is not investment. Day trading is a form of gambling. Day traders, almost by definition, will lose money over any given long period. They won't make money because of the costs involved in day trading. So if I now move on to what is responsible investing, and essentially, historically, investing ethically meant that you didn't invest in certain things. People said, I don't want to invest in tobacco, or I don't want to invest in arms, or so it's a sort of negative proposition. The alternative way of looking at it is a positive proposition and say that you want to invest in things which you care about. And what you might care about may be the environment, it may be all sorts of different things. Different people have different interests. Now, the sort of three factors which by popular parlance make up this universe are ESG. It's known as ESG: environmental, social, and governance. Environmental mean it can mean things like deforestation, plastic waste, pollution, those sort of things. Social factors are things like working conditions. Recent examples of that appeared in the press of companies which haven't had terribly good working conditions, apparently. Boohoo and Deliveroo most recently. The fact that most of the people who work for Deliveroo don't even earn the national living wage. Employee relations, human rights. You know, who will ever forget what RTZ did in Australia recently? HSBC has had its issues over its approach to activists in Hong Kong. And the other factor is governance, and that's things like executive pay, not having excessive executive pay. Board diversity. Are there women on the board? Are there people of colour on the board? Tax. I have a particular personal abhorrence to companies who have built themselves on the fact that they don't pay tax anywhere in the world. I shan't name those companies because they might get sued. Who knows? Moving on now to personal goals. What is it that you personally want to achieve by investing responsibly? Are you prepared to sacrifice financial gains? For quite a long period, tobacco has been an extremely strong investment performer. But a lot of people might say, I don't want to invest in tobacco. So if they don't invest in tobacco, they've had to accept that they might not make the returns that they would otherwise have got. Or do you want to try and achieve potentially better returns? Over the 5 years up to the end of 2020, the index, there are various indices, which there are people in the investment world who track all sorts of investments and how they perform. And indices of what you might call responsible investments have done extremely well over the 5 years up to the end of 2020 and have outperformed stocks generally. So it sounds like a very good idea. However, in the 3 months of this year, they've underperformed. So there is no guarantee that they will outperform, although there is a very strong argument for saying that the companies of the future are more likely to be companies who are ethically sound than companies which aren't ethically sound. So you're probably actually not risking too much by going into ethical investments rather than non-ethical investments. In fact, you probably will gain over the long term. And the other thing about personal goals is, do you have any specific interest yourself? Obviously, a lot of people who are present today will be interested in climate change and things like that. So their interest may be, how can I invest in companies which benefit the environment and help to combat climate change? What is it that we're talking about that you're going to invest? There are sort of three, I've identified anyway, three sort of areas of money that you may have which you want to invest. One is personal savings or inheritances. In other words, just money that you have in your bank or in other investments at the moment, wherever they might be. The second area is ISAs. So if you've got a stocks and shares ISA, then that can be used for responsible investing. And the third area is pensions. Now, pensions break down broadly into two types of pension. One type of pension is where you have your personal pot. That's things like personal pensions or company pensions, which are defined contribution pension schemes. And where you've got your personal pot, you can determine, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on what arrangement you're in, you can determine how that money is invested, where it's invested. And this is where most people actually have the financial resources to be able to direct into responsible investing. It's in pensions. The other type of pension are defined benefit pension schemes, company pension schemes. There are fewer and fewer of them in the private sector now, but all public sector pension schemes virtually are defined benefit. Now, with a defined benefit scheme, what you're entitled to is to be paid a benefit at some time in the future when you retire or when you die. You have no control, direct control, over where the money is invested. However, you could have indirect control over that by putting pressure on the trustees of pension schemes. And there is a website called Make My Money Matter, which helps people to make representations to the trustees of big pension schemes about what happens to their money, because it's the trustees of the pension schemes who have the legal responsibility to direct where that money is invested. But if you want to have a bit of a sway over it, then there is the opportunity to do so. And Make My Money Matter is an extremely good route to do that. So how do you go about it? So you've decided, yeah, makes good sense, I'm prepared to take the risks, etc. How can you do about it? You can do it yourself. There is huge amounts of information now on the internet. There is, again, another very good website, which I would mention, called Ethical Consumer, which has huge amounts of stuff, not just on investment, it's far more broadly based than that, but they have a very good section on investment. And there's the Share Centre and there's New Money, which are other websites which provide huge amounts of information on how you might go about it if you want to invest your money into things which matter to you. There is what's called investment platforms. These are companies, and I mentioned two. I mean, there are quite a number of them, but I'll mention two which I quite like: Interactive Investor and AJ Bell. These provide the outlet for people to invest their money. You can invest through funds. So rather than being invested in individual investments, you can invest through funds. The funds will be of all sorts. There are hundreds of thousands, literally, of different funds in the world that people can put their money into, and those funds all have different aims. And if you do the research, or somebody does the research for you, or you use some of the materials which I'm going to provide people with, then they can find the funds which can meet the needs and aims that you particularly want to put your money into. You can look to take advice from people and say, well, this is all a little bit beyond me, I'm not so confident to do it, but where will you get the advice from? I'm afraid that an awful lot of independent financial advisors are not greatly skilled in the area of ethical investing. I'm sure that they will gradually realize that they need to be, because more and more people will want that sort of advice. But there is an organization called the Ethical Investment Association, which is a group of IFAs who claim to specialize in advising people from an ethical standpoint. If you look at, going back to something I mentioned earlier, I think called Ethical Consumer, they in fact have one or two of their own favorites amongst those advisors, which are members of that association. You could decide to hand it all, your money, over to a professional investment manager. And professional investment managers, you can say to them, look, I don't want to invest in certain things, or I do want to invest in certain things. They will obviously charge you fees for doing all this, but they will make ultimately the decisions, but they can do it within the confines which you prescribe for those managers. So what are the different types of things that you could be investing in? Well, there's individual investments.
Oh,
Yeah. Go back, dear.
sorry.
Sorry, the beautiful advisor has gone slightly.
Oh, no.
No, go back.
Saka. No.
I haven't got anything.
Yes, you have. You click on it. And then
Oh,
there we are. You could decide if you're to go into individual investments. There are companies who specialize in investing in various areas. There's a company called, all this sort of things that I'm going to be mentioning will be in this list, which can be provided by Carrie at the end, by the way. So there's a company called Ceres Power Holdings, which specializes in various areas of power production. In the financial sector, Legal & General and Aviva, in my opinion, are both insurance companies who have a vastly greater ethical bent than a lot of other organizations in the financial sector. The National Savings has announced that it's going to launch later this year a green bond, so that the money will be used by the government to enhance green projects. Exactly what form it's going to take, what they're going to offer, nobody knows yet, but it was announced in the last budget. And there are quite a number of other ways in which you'll be able to do, and I'll set those out in this stuff that you'll be able to get from Carrie. There's investment trusts. They're a type of fund, really, whereby they will invest in lots of different companies, and some of them specialize in things like renewables, solar energy, wind energy. Active funds. What that means is that these are funds which invest over a wide range of investments, and they do it on an active basis on your behalf, but they specialize in particular areas. So there are organizations, there's one called Keynes, Trojan, Egon, and they all have ethical funds. If you look for these investment managers, a lot of them have ethical funds. You need to be slightly beware of a thing called greenwashing. And that's where some of these funds sound very good, but when you dig beneath the surface, they actually don't do what they say on the tin. They make good noises, but they don't really do what they say on the tin.
oh,
No, go back.
Oh.
And finally, there are passive funds. Very few passive funds. What a passive fund is, it invests in an index. The one example which I found that actually would meet anybody's purposes is the LNG Future World ESG Developed Index. The big advantage of passive funds is that they are very cheap. So the fees that are taken for carrying out these investments are much, much lower than the fees in active funds. However, passive funds probably aren't quite as good at it as active funds would be. Now, I want to just finish off with something that Jill has been determined to thrust in front of you, which is cryptocurrencies. The best known of cryptocurrency is Bitcoin. Now, in my opinion, cryptocurrency is not an investment. That's the first point to say. It isn't an investment at all. It has no underlying value. It's not regulated in any way. It's exceedingly volatile. Just to give you an example of the volatility, government securities have an annual volatility of 3% per annum. So you wouldn't expect to lose more than 3% a year or gain more than 3% a year if you invest in government securities. Equities have an annual volatility of 13% plus. So again, won't go up more than 13%, won't go down much more than 13% on average. Might do, but on average won't. Cryptocurrencies have an annual volatility of 120%. So you could lose virtually all your money within a year, or you could double your money in a year, on an average year. So they're extremely volatile. But the most important point, and the reason I'm talking to you about them, is their environmental impact of cryptocurrency. Bitcoin, I'll say, which is the biggest one of it, in carrying out the trades in Bitcoin requires every year 32 terawatts of energy. Now, I don't know whether that means anything to anybody. It means absolutely nothing to me. But if you convert that into real world, that is enough energy to power 3 million homes in the United States. And that's every year Bitcoin use that much energy. And they use it mainly through computers in China. And in China, most of the energy is produced from coal. So anybody who invests in Bitcoin is not remotely doing their bit for the environment. So I'll mention that to all of you here and hope that none of you would ever invest in Bitcoin, because I think it's just appalling. Right, that's all I'm going to say. As I say, Carrie has a long list of sources of information, which any of you can use if you really want to, and you really want to get involved in this personally. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. That was really, really useful, and so nice to know that you're an independent individual that's researched this really carefully for yourself, and that we're not being led astray by someone that's going to financially gain. So that was excellent. Thank you, Richard. Brilliant. Would anyone, before we hand over to Nicola, while things are fresh in the mind, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Richard at this point? We're only a small group, so if you want to just wave, or if you've put something in the chat, if no one has any burning questions at this moment, then we'll move straight on to Nicola, and then we can discuss and raise any other points at the end. So I think we're going to do that. So I'd like to welcome Nicola, who most of you know, but not all of you. So Nicola is a very good friend. Nicola is one of the inspirations behind me. I listened to Nicola speak in 2011 about her work in the Amazon. She spent 20 odd years working in the Amazon on incredible environmental problems, but creating solutions to those problems. She was one of the light bulb moments for me. So Nicola is also, with myself, co-founder of the Southeast Climate Alliance, which is an alliance of faith, community and environmental groups in Southeast England, which we're now sort of part of, but that's steered along by Greening Stenning. And I'll let Nicola introduce herself fully, but she's back in the UK full time. as well as the Bright New Future Roadshow with myself and a group of partners. Nicola's really involved in Rainforest Savers. So I'll hand over to you, Nicola. Thank you.
Yay, thank you, Carrie. Well, that was great to hear from Richard as well. And I've been banging on a long time about ethical investment as well. And people often ask, well, what can one person do? And there's this idea that, well, I'm just one person and I can't really make a difference. And part of my rhetoric has been about that we need systemic change. And systemic change means we need political change, we need economical change, we need legal change, we need social change, and we need individual change. And so it's like all of those are different threads in the tapestry. And many years ago, when it was the Occupy movement, I was asked to speak in London, went up to the Occupy movement, and it was all against the 1%. And I said to, the audience, well, I take it that nobody here has their money in a high street bank. At which point there was a lot of people kind of like looking down and looking around. And I was like, well, you can't be against something which you're a part of. So, it's really critical that we do put our money where our mouth is. And, because, the main 5 high street banks, they have no ethical policy. And if you actually look in to what they invest in, the main 5 high street banks invest a lot of money in fossil fuels. And, so for us to divest and to move our money out of fossil fuels and into clean energy or whatever it is that you're interested in, there's a good example with, the co-op. The co-op bank's been going for a long time. And if you just look at their ethical policy, it's been around a long time, and it was amazing when I discovered it. And it's like, wow, if you're with the co-op bank, they don't invest in fossil fuels, nuclear, animal testing, GMOs, the list goes on. And they will not loan to those, interests either. So, it's fascinating. There are other banks like Triodos, there are other ethical banks as well that you can move your money out of the high street banks and move it into somewhere where whether we've got £1 or £1 million, those pennies add up into what we're supporting and actually what we're investing. So, I don't think it's all about, well, I can only invest if I've got a huge amount of money. It's really that, and once we've changed our banks and our investment and where our money is sitting and what it's supporting, well, then it's, it's like, well, okay, who do you work for? And, do you belong to a church or a faith institution, or, what schools do your kids go to? And the council that you're a part of, have they divested? And there is a movement throughout councils to get them to divest council money out of fossil fuel industry. So, there's a lot of information that can be found about it, but, I think it's a really important thread in the tapestry, because money does make this world go round. And whether we like it or not, that's just how it is. So, rather than actually fighting against something, it's a good idea to actually put our support into something, the world we want to see. And therefore, by driving that economic change, then, we get there quicker. So just following on there a little bit from Richard's talk, and say this interest that I've had, and absolutely using ethical consumer is a brilliant way of educating ourselves on, not just what bank, but, what soup to eat or what bread to buy, or, it goes through everything from jeans and trainers through to, investments, or, and it really breaks it down into the ethical and the social policies, the political choices. And so you can make an informed decision about actually, what you're spending your money on. So with no further ado, I'm really wanting to talk about, say, as Carrie mentioned, I've been working in the Amazon for 20 years. And, what's this actually got to do with money in any way? So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Oh, Carrie, are you there? It's just come up that you've disabled my screen. Let's try again.
Yeah, sorry, I hadn't made you co-host. You are now.
There we go. right. So can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, actually, I'm just going to turn this around. Right, okay, so this is a kind of a new concept that I have called pay to breathe. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference with carbon offsetting and, you know, why, you know, I've been talking about we need to move on from just this idea of just carbon offsetting. So for those of you that don't know about the basics of carbon offsetting, you know, it's kind of this, well, where the carbon is being produced in the factories and the carbon that you are using in the food, your transportation, your travel, your energy, all of that creates an amount of carbon that you personally are using. And so what they say is, well, hey, you can put some money in to, this is a terrible slide, sorry about this, I haven't actually used this before. So you can put some money in to offset your amount of carbon that you've just used. And there are carbon calculators which can, you know, calculate exactly what your carbon footprint is. Now, most people just think about it as flying. You can fly somewhere and you can say, oh, well, in my flight, I've contributed to burning X amount of carbon. So therefore, I'll offset and I'll plant a few trees. And that's how it's mostly known. So, you know, some people talk about it a bit like a gilt tax. Well, you can carry on flying as long as you do your carbon offset. But there's a huge area with offsetting. So it's not just, you know, the flying, it's also your energy and your food and all the embedded carbon that comes into it. So, you know, there are people that have just started to wake up to this and to take personal choice in the matter. Now, until we have a carbon tax, when everybody will pay a tax on carbon, but we still don't have that. So we can buy what we want without worrying whether we're eating an apple from England or an apple from New Zealand. They could cost the same in money, but that's because there's no carbon tax on the one that comes over from New Zealand. So this money that we're paying as an offset for our carbon is invested, and we are then, say, offsetting. So where does the money go? So generally, most offset money is going into tree planting, it's going into biofuels, it's going into solar, renewable energy, cook stoves. I mean, cook stoves are a big one in, you know, in Africa and India, where a lot of people are cutting down a lot of forest to just to be able to cook on. If they have improved energy efficient stoves, they don't have to burn so much wood, therefore they don't have to burn so much, you know, release so much carbon. So by helping and through education of women can be used as carbon offsetting, you know, supporting Sussex Green Living and environmental organisations can be classed as offsetting. So there's many different areas, but mainly when people think of carbon offsetting, it goes into tree planting. So that's really what my interest is and what I want to talk about. There's another area, if it's not going into tree planting, it's going into natural ecosystem services. So I've been working with an organisation that's just launched called Rebalance.Earth. And Rebalance Earth is a group of economists, people from the IMF, and people that are valuing nature and saying, well, okay, how do we put a value on nature? And the valuation that has come up for a whale is 1.45 million per whale. For an elephant, 1.25 million for a forest elephant. Now, this is not a valuation on the animal itself. And so, you know, of course, I did not like the idea of valuing nature at all. It's been a very hard thing for me to get my head around because it doesn't feel right. You know, all nature is like putting a value on you as a human. I mean, what are you worth? Is the person next door worth more than you? Do we just look at it in monetary terms? Or how do we actually value something? And the valuation, when you look at the services, the natural ecosystem services, and why are whales and elephants so important as far as carbon offsetting? So the reason being that those two huge creatures sequester more carbon than anything else. So we look at carbon sequestration in a tree generally, and we can say, okay, well, this tree is able to sequester so much carbon in its biomass, in its leaves, in its wood, and also in its roots and the soil. So we can kind of get a calculation on that, on carbon. So there are trading schemes now in carbon. So there's lots of different areas about valuing carbon in the trees. Half of, the carbon that's absorbed is coming through the forest. The other half is being absorbed through the ocean. And we often forget the importance of the phytoplankton and what that's doing in the ocean. The more phytoplankton, the more carbon is absorbed into the ocean. And what do you need for healthy phytoplankton are whales. So whales eat phytoplankton, and whales poo a lot. And so the more whale poo and the more the whale dives up and down, releasing all the nutrients, the more phytoplankton you get, and therefore the more carbon is absorbed into the ocean. So if we start to look at, okay, yes, we know we need to get the carbon out of the atmosphere. So how do we do that? So if we're to look at those species that help us most, aside from the forests, if we restored the whale population to what it was naturally before the massive slaughters happened, the amount that they would be able to sequester by improving the amount of phytoplankton. So these calculations have been done, and this is how they have come out with the calculation of one whale is worth 1.45 million pounds. The forest elephants, the way they've been able to calculate the services of the elephants is because if you compare a forest, a healthy forest that has elephants in it, so what happens is that the elephants, they eat a lot and shit a lot as well, and they trample it all down. And when they are eating the forest, they are actually thinning it out, creating more regrowth, and enabling certain trees to get much bigger. So the bigger the trees, the more carbon is sequestered. If you look at the same forest that no longer has any elephants, there are not so many big trees. It's much more scrubby. So scientists can calculate the difference in carbon stored in a forest that has elephants and in a forest that doesn't have elephants. And that is how they can come up with this valuation. So, which, is a huge difference in, the value when we think of an elephant. It's like, well, if you ask somebody how much is an elephant worth, they just immediately think of the ivory. The ivory is worth around £29,000. So if we're to just think of an elephant in its worth, which is dead, and just of ivory, 29,000 is not a lot in comparison to actually an elephant really is worth over £1 million in the carbon that it sequesters. The same for a whale. Whale is only calculated in its blubber and in its fat. So we've really only been valuing nature when it's dead. A tree is valued as timber. So this talk about natural ecosystem services, it's really good to clarify that we're not talking about valuing the individual animal. We're talking about valuing the services that individual action actually helps us with, and which right now, we are talking about these huge machines we're going to create, and these big machines that are going to suck all the carbon out of the atmosphere. And it's like, actually, we have that already. If we are to allow these species, these huge species, to restore back to their natural, numbers. So this then means that governments would be wanting to protect these species. And by protecting these keystone species, you have to protect their habitat as well. So this is an area that, we've been working on at Rebalance Earth. So through carbon offsetting, the money goes towards these keystone species and ensuring that local people protect them, so that actually local people get paid to be forest guardians to ensure that the elephants are okay, because actually they get more money than they would if it was a one-off payment for ivory, where only a small group of people benefit one-off from that ivory. So this is, you know, one way of valuing nature. But this other idea, which I'm really interested in kind of like developing, is, you know, for the term at the moment, I'm talking about pay to breathe. And so what's actually the difference with just carbon offsetting and this idea I am talking about, pay to breathe? So basically, you know, we've got a quote here on, you know, reflecting the true value of biodiversity, according to the UN Global Assessment Report. 1 million animal and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades, more than ever before in human history. So when we're looking at protecting something, surely it's much more valuable to protect areas of high biodiversity. That is what is critical. We talk about, you know, the climate and ecological breakdown. And the ecological breakdown part of it is we are losing every single day so many species. And it's because these species don't have a value. They're not worth something in monetary terms. So because they're not worth anything, well, nobody really cares about protecting them a lot. That's just another, you know, collateral loss. So if we really want to value biodiversity, how do we go about valuing biodiversity? We can value carbon. We can value that carbon in that tree. Science can do that. But how do we value the difference between an intact primary forest, a primary forest that has had a few big trees taken out, a secondary forest which has regrown, or a plantation? So if we were to try and monetarily calculate the difference in the value of a forest, we can't do that at the moment because there is no valuation on biodiversity. And this is a huge area that is not being spoken about enough. And so although we keep using this word biodiversity, people aren't really understanding that we're not valuing it. And so I've also been working with some scientists on how do we value biodiversity. And unfortunately, you know, due to the lack of money, we weren't able to enter the X prize, which Elon Musk has just put up, which is a $10 million prize. And I was contacted by someone saying, you and your team need to enter, but you need 10,000 to enter. And it was just like, oh, okay. And the X prize was all about this year. It's about rainforests. And so most of the conversation is around satellite mapping. We can map an area of forest. We can work out how much carbon is stored there. Therefore, we can calculate it in carbon. And that's then where the conversation stops. But how do you actually value a forest from satellite? You can't. You've got to be on the forest floor to see what's actually there. So this team I've been working with, you know, these guys are specialist scientists in biodiversity, and I've worked with them in the Los Cedros Reserve. And I asked them one day, I said, how do you think is the best way to value biodiversity? And they said, oh, we could do that. We can just, you know, suck a bit of air. And through the air, we will capture the pollen and the fungal spores. And we can grind up a bit of soil. And with that air and soil, we run it through a DNA sequencer, and we can find out how much DNA, how many different species are trapped in that tiny bit of air and soil. Really. And from that, obviously, the more species, the richer it is, the more genetic information is there, the more possibilities there is for medicine. Most medicine comes from fungi or bacteria. So, well, if we're in a more biodiverse area, those fungal and bacterial species are the antibiotics of the future. So we can use evaluation based on pharmaceuticals and say, well, actually, biodiversity equals medicine. So there are many ways we can start looking at the importance of valuing a more intact ecosystem. So, you know, it's just every day. I mean, I can almost hear the chainsaws. You know, I've been so aware of, say, this 20 years working in the Amazon and so much forest being cut down. And it's cut down for poverty. It's cut down. Many people tell me the same thing. They say, we want to send our kids to school. How can you argue with that? You know, we need to put food on the table. There's not the same amount of fish in the rivers like there used to be. People need to buy food. And how do they get money for food? Then, you know, they cut forests down. And the biodiversity loss is, you know, people talk about it like we are currently in another mass extinction. And I mean, it's just this, I find this so hard to imagine how every day we are just losing more and more species that have not even got names. And when I was locked down at the end of this trip for 5 months in the Los Cedros Reserve, and so much in that forest still has not been identified by science. It still doesn't have a name. And around, the reserve is obviously a supposedly protected reserve. But outside of the reserve, it's owned by farmers, which are turning it into cattle pastures. So time is running out, you know, for these species that we are just losing every day. So it comes down to a choice. Well, if we're going to invest in carbon offsetting, do we invest in tree planting or do we invest in primary standing forest? Well, there's not really that much going on in comparison to carbon offsetting. The energy really is about tree planting. And of course, I don't want to diss tree planting. Tree planting needs to happen as well. But on one hand, we're planting millions of little tiny trees. And on the other hand, we're cutting down millions of huge ancient trees full of biodiversity. Something is wrong with that picture. You know, you can't ever plant a primary forest. It doesn't, it's just not possible. So what we're doing is we are, say, putting all this energy and focus into tree planting, like that's going to solve us, that's going to help. And it will help absolutely to a way. But also the way that we do it. So we could invest in 1,000 trees and they could be planted in the middle of a football field somewhere, not linked to any other biodiversity. So they're not going to get that much within it. Or we could say, well, here's a primary forest. Let's first protect that and then tree plant out from it. Therefore, we would be enlarging primary forest, and it would mean that the biodiversity would be able to extend its range. Now, that's much more of a kind of intelligent way of tree planting, having a heart somewhere where there already is high levels of biodiversity. So I think we really need to be tactical as far as where we spend our money as well, in getting as much as we can for it. So, you know, the difference, tree planting, it's very long term. You know, trees are not going to, little saplings are not going to sequester very much carbon for a few decades. So, you know, yes, they do sequester carbon, but it takes a long time. There's very limited wildlife habitat to start with when they're young, and they certainly don't have that diversity. They do prevent soil erosion and prevent flooding. So all important reasons why we need tree planting. Why would we want to protect primary forest? It's an immediate sequestering of carbon because they're huge trees. There's a lot of food for humans and wildlife in big established forests, large diversity. Big established forests create rain. It's the fungal spores that's in the forest that helps to create more rain. The rain also, and the tree roots then protects the watershed, so you don't get all this runoff, and so the water quality is better. Of course, it prevents soil erosion. Huge amount of genetic information, which not only for food and for medicine, but for bio-inspired technology. Some of you may have seen my presentations on biomimicry and how we are starting to gain information through bio-inspired technology. And so the Los Cedros Reserve, which I was a part of, and I got a valuation done on that because even though it's a reserve, they want to dig it up for copper and gold. And so working with this team, it was valued just on the carbon. Just on the carbon, it's the only way we could value it right now. And it's valued at $150 million, the reserve, which is a lot more than the copper and the gold below it. But because we're not talking in these terms of actually being able to value nature. So, you know, we really need to start looking at this, you know, as far as, you know, where are we with carbon offsetting, investing in all this tree planting, or can we find another way to invest in keeping forests standing? So, you know, these are some kind of like, you know, shocking facts here. You know, worldwide, 13 million hectares are already gone. 34,000 hectares per day is still being cut down. It's being cut down, as we know, for agricultural, logging, fuel, road burning, biofuels, and mining. These are the main reasons that, you know, we carry on cutting the forests at the rate that we do. And the current trend is we have 79 years left until the end of rainforests if we carry on at the same as what we're doing right now. That's the trajectory that we have. So yeah, that's what we've got to kind of, which is why it has become my priority, is really finding a way to work with how do we keep these forests standing. So who's best placed to protect the remaining primary ecosystems? You know, is it foundations and, you know, charities and, you know, big organizations, or actually is it the local people? And really, it's the local people. The indigenous people that live in the forests, they know how to not take too much. They know, you know, what all the trees are for and what their uses are. And they have an incredibly long relationship with these places. And, you know, we often have these, you know, charities which, you know, are wanting to do good, come in and actually are nowhere near as efficient as the local people themselves. Now, you know, I have been working with them, and I've been working with a charity called Rainforest Saver in a way of actually preventing deforestation by teaching agroforestry. So, which is a whole other subject, which I won't go into right now. But what we do need to face is that these people need money and they don't want to cut the forest down. I've had many conversations with them and I hear the same thing over again. We don't want to have to cut the forests down, but we need money to survive right now. So is there not a way where we can actually, through this idea of carbon offsetting, prevent them from cutting the forest down in the first place? To say, hey, you are the guardians of the forest. We want to pay you to be the guardians of the forest, so you don't need to cut it down. But the benefit for all of us is the air that we breathe. The benefit for all of us is this genetic diversity, which, you know, even coming back to things like potatoes and tomatoes, they come from the Amazon. And if we get major blights that then wipe it all out, we will have to go back to the original plants again and start to adapt them. So we've really kind of put all our eggs in one basket with agriculture. We must have, you know, the origin species again, if we were to need them in the future. So this is the threat, you know, I mean, it's not just huge agribusiness, which is responsible, obviously, for huge areas of deforestation, but also lots of small farmers. Now, when I started working in the Amazon 20 years ago, it was one man, one machete, and they couldn't actually cut down that much forest. But now, every community and most guys have got a chainsaw. And the difference with how much forest you can cut down in one day between a machete and a chainsaw is vast. So that is why it's speeding up more and more. The deforestation is that people are trying to survive. They can get hold of a chainsaw and they can clear a lot of forest in a day. So why do we want to support these local people? Because they want to send their kids to school. They need medicine, they need food. They have the local knowledge. You need local knowledge to collect seeds, you know, to actually be able to do real reforestation. You need to regenerate from local seed source. They are the best people to protect the forests, and they have a deep spiritual and ancestral tie to the land, which is something that many people in the West, sadly, we've lost that, because I don't know how many people's parents and grandparents and great grandparents are still living on the same piece of land. So that idea for us is very hard to imagine, how connected you would be if your great grandparents were buried outside where you live right now, and your grandparents and your parents and your whole family. You become very connected to land where your families and your ancestors are buried. So there becomes a real value in that as well. So when we look at the difference of the valuing of the impact, 1 hectare of primary forest with having cattle on it and as an intact ecosystem. So, I mean, there's a huge difference. So cattle, obviously you've got the rainforest destruction, you then get soil erosion, water pollution, methane release, all the veterinary chemicals, you know, a lot of people eating a lot of hamburgers and getting fatter, and, you know, just farmers making so little. So, you know, it's like, this is what we're up against, but the driving force between so much deforestation, cattle is what they know, but we don't have a value on all the negative impacts. So, you know, we need to be able to, you know, value the positive and value the negative. So when we're looking at forest, and how do we value that? It supports wildlife, creates oxygen. It creates rain, it protects water, it prevents soil erosion, spiritual benefits, and a place of awe and beauty. How do we actually value all those things? So looking at how this would work, so there would need to be partnerships between charities in the north and charities in the global south. So working with local grassroots organizations in the global south. This is what's firstly is important, to create strong partnerships. The money is not going to be coming from the global south because they don't have any. So it's the global north that has the money. The money will be coming through the north. Payments will be going through to local organizations who will be able to identify first, well, we can identify the key biodiversity areas through satellite as well. I mean, now you can see amazing down to the last tree through satellite mapping. So we can clearly tell, yes, that's an intact area of primary forest. You can tell that there's big trees there. You can see all of that from satellite mapping. So when they sign a contract which says that they are going to get paid per hectare to leave the forest alone, if it gets cut down, that can be seen through satellite mapping, and they don't receive their payments anymore. So, you know, it's a very kind of clear way of, okay, this is cut and dry. We are paying you to be the guardians of the forest. And so then the money gets through and they naturally have local co-ops. And so their local co-ops working with groups of farmers would be able to, you know, move the money. What we don't want is to be having to go through governments who just cream off money. So it's important that organizations partner together, charitable organizations, rather than it going through the government. And so this way, the farmers end up getting a lot more money. And together that then helps to alleviate deforestation and poverty. So why do we want to invest this way? Well, we need an economic paradigm where nature is at the core, which is what we don't have right now. And as I said before, you know, currently nature is only valued when it's dead. We need to shift this so that we can value the natural ecosystem services and to move from this kind of extraction mindset that we have to a regeneration. By firstly identifying KBAs, key biodiversity areas. Those are the places we need to identify and protect first. Those that have, they're the jewels of our planet that have the most biodiversity. And then, like I said before, we protect those areas and we tree plant out from them to enlarge them again. So if we were to talk in the language of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which a lot of corporations speak in, you know, they want to know how many SDGs is this project ticking off. Well, this kind of project would tick off loads: no poverty, zero hunger, health, education, water, work, climate action, life on land. So all of these SDGs would be able to be ticked when speaking to large organizations about, okay, what are you investing right now? It's generally tree planting. That's where most of the money is being invested with large corporations. So what I want to see is this money, be, even if it was 50-50, half of it in tree planting and half of it in the protection of established rainforests. So then it's like, well, what's in it for me? Which is, generally what a lot of people, want to know as well. What's in it for me? Well, of course, it's a feel-good factor. It addresses both climate change and the ecological breakdown and species extinction and poverty. So people are getting a lot more for their money's worth. Offsetting is now expected from responsible individuals, businesses, and organizations. So, we as individuals do have to accept our part. It's not like the other, they are causing climate change. We are all causing climate change. And so, once we start to kind of identify, well, actually, if we're all a part of it, what is my personal carbon footprint? And what have I done to offset my personal carbon footprint? And so, as we said, like in the future, there'll be carbon taxes. It'll already be taken into consideration, but we are not anywhere near that time yet. So it takes the individuals starting to say, well, okay, let's start calculating it. And Rainforest Saver, who say I'm a trustee for, we have a Lara cereal. And if you go into Sainsbury's, they sell 1 million boxes a year. And a Lara muesli, they are now, it's carbon CO3, they take it to the next level and they offset the carbon from all of the ingredients in the muesli and they give it to us at Rainforest Saver for that is their way of offsetting. Now they've done their own calculations as all they sell is muesli, but they sell 1 million boxes a year. And so they've actually worked on calculating the carbon footprint of all of those ingredients and been able to work out, it's a very rough estimate, but it's better than nothing for them to be able to say, we want to offset our carbon and we choose to give it to Rainforest Saver because we believe in what they're doing. So keeping intact forest standing is one of the greatest legacies that we could really leave behind, knowing that an area of forest has been protected. But we're not just paying to offset carbon. We said before, it's like we're actually paying to breathe. We do pay for our water and we pay for our food. So why don't we pay for the air that we breathe? And question, where does this air come from? Well, half of it comes from the forests and half of it comes from the ocean. But of course we expect it to be for free. But maybe we could question that. And could it be worked out that actually, we also look at, depending on, how much you earn and how much money you have and how much carbon that you need to offset, then, like how you can't be a set fee all around the world. So the conclusion, it is vital that we protect and value biodiversity. Poverty is what's fueling deforestation and extinction, as well as large agribusiness. We pay for food and water, but we take for granted the air. Carbon offsetting means you can burn fossil fuels and pay a tax. This does not protect species or people. Moving money to the rightful guardians of intact ecosystems alleviates poverty and therefore the pressure on the forests. And primary forests provide us with oxygen, rain, food, species diversity, genetic information, as well as sequestering carbon. So really, what is more important than our breath to the very last one? So that's the kind of end of my presentation. I did see somebody just put their hand up, so I just thought I would just finish this presentation, and that's my websites for those of you that don't know me, and I will send those links, especially about the valuation of the whales and the elephants and the valuation of the forests through Carrie when she actually sends up a follow-up from this call. So I'll just stop sharing my screen then.